Welcome everyone to another episode of the Berlin Functional Programming Group. I am really excited for tonight's event because it's kind of in an area that I myself don't know much about. I have known about the Elixir language and the Phoenix framework for some time, and I've dabbled in them a little bit, but I suffer from the same condition that I think a lot of functional programmers suffer from, which is remaining too much in a kind of language silo. So a lot of our talks are Haskell oriented, right? We have a lot of Haskell talks, and we haven't really broken out of that too much. Here and there, I try to find ways. We have an Idris talk coming up at the end of July, but Idris is pretty close to Haskell. But I'm actually very much interested in Elixir and what they're doing over there. And I wanted to really broaden out the kinds of talks we're getting at this meetup, because it is the functional programming meetup. It is not the Haskell meetup. And I think that we have a lot to learn from each other in these different language communities, and we should silo less and spread the knowledge more, because we're all very small communities and we have a lot more to gain from sharing than from remaining in our little pigeonholes. So in that spirit, I was thinking, who should I invite? And I really had no idea. I reached out to Jose Valim, and I asked him if he could recommend somebody. And immediately he recommended Michael Crumm. Specifically, I was interested in someone to talk about new features in Phoenix, which I heard about, and they sound very cool. LiveDashboard and LiveView. I think LiveDashboard is the new feature that got me very excited and made me reach out to Jose, and he said, yeah, talk to Michael, he's the guy for that. And I reached out to Michael, and he said, maybe, and then we kind of went back and forth for a little while, and eventually we got to tonight, when he's actually going to speak to us. He's a core member of the Phoenix team, and this is his baby, so I'm actually very excited to have a core member of the team building this product, building a product that I think if you're not familiar with Elixir or Phoenix or this framework, if you're a web app developer, see, this is the areas where functional programming kind of falls short. Web app development, this might be something you could get interested in, and I think he's going to persuade you that it's worth taking a look at if you haven't already. If you're already an Elixir developer, then you're going to have a chance to learn from and do a little Q&A with one of the creators of this framework and its bleeding edge features. So I'm delighted to have Michael Crumm join us and teach us all about this topic. If you have questions during the meetup, please type them into the chat, and I will find an opportune moment to interrupt Michael and allow you to unmute and ask your question. But please don't just unmute and start speaking. I'll get to you as soon as I can. And that is that's my introduction. So Michael, I'm going to hand it over to you. And thank you very much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, and we went through a little back and forth to make this happen, and I'm very glad to be here. I was honored, but also yeah, I was pleasantly surprised that Jose reached out and asked or recommended me for this. So we've been working on the LiveDashboard tool specifically for quite a few months. We started last October, November, what feels like, decades ago, but was a few short months in truth. And yeah, I'm very, very excited to be here, happy to be here. I'll say hello and welcome from my Elixir silo, as I know very little about Haskell, though I am very interested in that area too. You'll all forgive me if I hope if I tell you that I come from a very heavy PHP background. That's my baby. That's where I started with everything way back in the day, and did that for a very, very, very long time before, actually it was a former colleague, boss of mine who turned me on to Elixir, and he just was really just like, hey, have you seen this? I said, no, what is this? And he was he was a guy who always shared with me things that I just found wild and half the time didn't understand. And that's how I felt the first time I looked at Elixir too. I was like, what in the world is this? But it was amazing, and it was something that for me was really like completely game changing, just in the way that I looked at development, the way that I went about writing software. And so to come from, it feels like completely different worlds, although there's a weird place where there's some similarity, I say that lightly, with, you know, with the things we did in the PHP world. I think that may make more sense as I move on here. We'll see. I will say also that I don't have a full-blown presentation for y'all today, and for that I do apologize. But given again the state of the world, I hope you will. I hope you will forgive me, and I am happy to just to chat and go through some things here and show you what I think is cool, what led me to where I'm at, and somehow got me on the core team for Phoenix, which was unexpected, but I am super happy to be a part of. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll take a look at some stuff. And Stephen, feel free to jump in whenever if there are questions and things of that nature, because I'm happy to, we'll just talk about.
I'll be here watching.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about Elixir. If y'all are primarily Haskell developers, then I'll just jump straight into some stuff that I think is cool. So let's see, what am I running here?
Just a note, I noticed that right before the meetup, we had like somewhere between 20 and 50 Elixir developers join the group, I think, probably for your talk. So I wouldn't assume everybody's a Haskell developer.
Well, that's okay. No, that's fine. And well, I'm not going to be able to make any comparisons anyway, because like I said, I don't know Haskell. But just real quick then, primer on Elixir. So Elixir is a programming language developed by Jose Valim. We're up to, I think, did we release 1.11 yet? Maybe. I haven't upgraded. But language is about, I think, 8 years old now, maybe. But it's built on top of Erlang, or the Beam, which is the Ericsson virtual machine that was created to run, you know, telephone switches and all kinds of crazy things where we needed, you know, concurrent connections and, you know, and processes that stayed alive or were supervised in a way that they could come back if they ran into a problem. So the motto there being that we say, let it crash, and some people that gets taken the wrong way, but the concept is that you want to have something that is fault tolerant in the sense that it can recover from failure, right? So with these, you know, phone switches, or whether it's that or devices that are remotely installed places and things that can't, you know, where you can't get to them maybe for whatever different reason, you want to be sure or have some assurance that you can, you know, that even in the case of a failure, right, that the software will continue running, that it's able to like bring itself back up and continue operating. So with that said, I'm gonna just jump into a couple of things that like what I think is really cool about Elixir, and then we'll move on to the Phoenix stuff as well. But the things that really sold me, like I said, I was a PHP developer from way back. So I heard a talk by a guy named Justin Heilman. He goes by Bob the Cow on GitHub, if y'all may be familiar with him. But he gave a talk one time called PHP is Meant to Die, which is hilarious. But it's, you know, the idea that we start up these processes, right? You get a web request. Most of the time you're using PHP, you're using it through, you know, it's with a web server, right? It's with Apache or Nginx or what have you. And the process, you know, the request comes in, and that represents, there's a process, right, for that request. And we do whatever we do, and we serve the requests, and then you get the response back out, and then it's dead, it's gone. And the very first time I ever tried to write software in a different paradigm, I think I tried to write a Flask app in Python, right? And the idea that a process stuck around longer than that one request was very confusing to me. So what we have within the Elixir world, the Beam there too, is that when we're starting up these processes, they are not Unix processes or OS processes. They are Beam processes, so they're very lightweight and they live within the VM. And we can do that. You know, we can do that a lot. We can create a lot of these processes for very cheaply. And in so doing, we have that same level of you know, it's sort of that same feel, right? But we don't need the full-blown OS process. It's that same kind of, you know, we get the thing in, you have a process that represents that request, it goes back out, you know, and then that process dies, and we finish that request and we're done. And then another process is brought up, again, Beam process to handle the next request. So, okay, so I'm all over the place, but let me real quick jump into just a quick interactive session here. So I'll start up an IEX, and I'll tell you about the things that I like about Elixir. And the first one is immutability. So that is my, oops, well, that works too. So B and A is still 1, and that to me is just great. because again, coming from, and I frame a lot of this from the perspective of like, if you're coming from PHP or somewhere else, again, you'll have to forgive me. But the idea that things are immutable, this was huge to me. Like, this was game changing. You know, I'd only ever dealt with that in like one particular object or one particular class, and in another language. Otherwise, everything was mutable, right? Things could just change from underneath you all the time. So this to me was absolutely amazing. So let me see if I can do another thing. What's the easiest way to do another thing might be. So let's see. I'm going to, the next thing for me that was massive was pattern matching. So let's try this. Let's do a case for B. If B, when B, let's see, can I do, let's see, I am gonna forget which thing I wanted here. I'm not sure, I wanted rem. Okay, so B, when the remainder of B were 2 and 0, print even. In other cases, and I'm just gonna ignore the variable there, let's return odd, and let's see if that's enough. There we go. So here's my case. I'm gonna pattern match. This is wild. I should have used a way simpler example. I apologize, but I'm gonna write a case statement, and I'm going to check the state of B. So here on the left-hand side, I'm gonna get my variable to match against. I could have given it probably should have given it a different name, but it's lexically scoped. So this is its own B. It's not this B here. And I'm going to, this is a guard. This statement here is a guard, and I'm guarding on B to say when the remainder of B is equal to 0. And when that's true, so we'll go to the right side of the arrow. In that case, I want this case to return even. On this side, I'm still pattern matching. This is my pattern match over here to say that, in all other cases, return me odd. So unfortunately, I didn't wrap this in any sort of code, so I'd have to repeat it all. But if I ran A through there, we'd get odd back. And this is a terrible example, and I'll give you a better one here in a minute. But that's, the idea of being able to do pattern matching. And so these two things, like just that right there was honestly what sold me on Elixir. And as soon as I understood this, even just a little bit, I realized just how much more expressive I could be in a language, and how much I could save myself from myself by not worrying about mutability, not having to worry about state changing and out from underneath me in all kinds of different places. And so the more that I built on top of this, just the more, like, really I was sold on the idea of Elixir and really functional programming. I mean, because I'm sure a lot of these things aren't specific to Elixir or Erlang as a language. These are, but it's really what sold me on this format, this type of programming, and why I really haven't looked back too much since then. And I've been very siloed though myself, so I agree with Stephen there that we should all break out a little bit more and learn from all these different languages and paradigms that we have. So let's see. So from there, like that's kind of the baseline, and the next bits that really. So if you come for the immutability and the pattern matching, you should stay for OTP. And OTP, if you're unfamiliar, at one point was an acronym that meant something, and now I think it's sort of sort of like PHP in that way, that it has no actual meaning. But I believe it stood for the Open Telecom Protocol, which was essentially it's an API, if you will. It's a pattern. It's a way of writing code within the message passing functional paradigm of the beam to basically to maintain state. I mean, that's the short version of it. So rather than ramble about that, let me give you an example. Before, the easiest way to give this example would probably be to write some code. Since we know we're going to want, well, you know what, we'll do this in a couple of steps, because we've got the time. So mix new, I'm gonna make a counter. So I'm gonna run this and just build a project. So mix is the build environment for Elixir. So we can use mix to get us a new Elixir project. So mix new and the name of the project. And I have a funny feeling that I wanted to show you OTP and I didn't give myself an application supervisor. So let's go ahead and delete that and let's do it again. Mix new counter, and I'm going to give it this flag here, sup, for supervisor. So this is going to build a supervision tree for me and an application, which is effectively how how you manage process state within Elixir. So if you want to know more, I'm going to go really fast, and I'm probably not going to get into enough like technical detail. If you're interested in more technical detail, there are some amazing courses online. That even Pragmatic, I think, has some really good ones, and I can recommend some more if I'm not thinking clearly at the moment on that, but I will be happy to give you some more links to just awesome talks on if you want to get really down into the depths of all of this. But I'm going to take a look. So we've got our application created, and from here I could run. I can get back into here now with my. I'm running an interactive console, but I've run it with I get to run the mix application. So if we take a look, I should have now a counter.application. If we want to do H, I think will give us some information. No, I wanted I. H is for a function. But so here we can get an idea of some more information about just the module itself. So this is our term. The data type is an atom, but we can see that there is a applet or module bytecode for that as well. So if we look at suppose I can go ahead and pull this. Let's open it and look at some code. I see here, so I have a basic class that gets generated here with just a hello world, and we could do a counter dot hello, and you see we get world. If we wanted to get the health from this, we can run h counter dot hello, and that would also be it's hello /0. Hello 1, you can see it doesn't exist, but H is super nice because you can just get documentation just pops out everywhere. One of the other great things about Elixir, just the ecosystem in general, like the documentation is amazing almost across the board. Testing that is built in and just works out of the box. Some very, very, very handy tooling that is just available to you right away that really makes working in the language just such a joy. So we can see that we have, all right, so we've got a thing that does, we've got a function, we've got some documentation for it. So here's our application, which is effectively going to give us so it's a, what's the short way to put this? I apologize. I haven't thought about how to put this in the most basic terms, or just I shouldn't say basic, but like just a starting point here. If you haven't seen this pattern. So an application supervisor is just that, is a supervisor. And a supervisor is a special form of what you would call in OTP a gen server. And a gen server is just a generic server pattern. Like that's really all it is. So you have this way of, again, sending messages in, it maintains some state, you get responses out. A supervisor is a special one of those that is meant to manage other processes. So it's a process that's job is strictly to manage other processes. And an application one has a little bit extra, extra oomph to it, that it is the topmost, it is the root module or root process for this particular application. So within that, we can define the children of this supervisor, and you see we got like an example of how to do that here. So if I wanted to, let's do this. Let's go ahead and just write an extremely simple counter so we can see, what that would look like. And we can, this one it called, there's an example here of using a worker. So I'll go ahead and call mine worker. So I'll define a module, def counter.worker, and we're going to say use gen server. So I'm going to give myself a gen server. And if I save that, I'll probably get some, some nice warnings that I need an init function to set up my gen server. So a couple bits and pieces to that. So without getting into a bunch of stuff, we'll define what we're told to define, and we'll do this, and it's going to take an argument, and it's going to return. Let's see. For now, I'm just going to return okay and 0 because this is my count. And So this is just to set up my server itself. So there's an init, it's going to get called when the application starts. There's obviously a little bit more, you know, there's more that could be talked about under the hood, but for the time being, we're just going to start the worker in this way. I'm going to give myself one function to be able to read the state back out. So what I want to do is I'm going to say def value. Apologize, I'm probably going to have to add another little bit of piece here because I need to make sure this has a single name. So to do that, I need to define my start link function that is going to take the argument that when the supervisor starts this process. So when I do that, I'm going to call, it's going to be a so it's going to call my start link. I'm going to call gen server.startLink. Then server.startLink takes the module. We can use this naming convention to mean this module. Our init argument is what's going to get passed to init here. We can, you know, just for kicks, let's go ahead and set the 0 here, and we'll say initial count. So this is where this comes through. So we'll say the only state for this. The second argument is the state for this gen server. So it's going to hold on to this state. So I'm going to set the initial argument to 0. I'm ignoring what start link takes. We could pass this in from the top of the application tree, but I'm going to ignore that just for the moment. And so I'm just going to set it here. The other thing I'm going to do though is in this the third bit, this is a list. The formatter is going to remove those for me, but just so you can see it. This is a list of options that we're going to pass. We're going to give this particular process a name. And what it means to give this process a name is that there can only be one with that name. So this is my counter.worker. Counter.worker, there will only be one of those. And that way we can talk to it when we're doing message passing, or when we don't want to talk to the process, we can talk to it by name instead of by just its process ID or PID. So in so doing, I'm going to send a message to myself. Let's see where. So when I want to get the value, I'm going to call this server, and this is its name, is the module name. So I'm going to call this server, and I'm just going to ask it for its value. And you can see this has the potential to time out. So I can give it how long I want it to time out. By default, it's 5 seconds. That's fine for our purposes. We could make it smaller or larger depending on what you were doing. But so we'll just do that. But then, so if we just do this, you know what? Maybe the better way to do this would be let's see what happens. So let me go ahead and just move this over here. We'll just, what do you say? We'll just play in VS Code. Hopefully this reads all right. Let me go ahead and start my server. Okay. I have a funny feeling I didn't actually, well, yeah, it should be there. So we should have a process called, let's see if we can find it. We should have a process called counter.worker. Hey, there it is. Okay. So then what if let's see, which function do I want here? I'm gonna exit, tell it to exit. I might have to give this the PID and not the name. Let's see. Yeah, it doesn't like that. Okay, so let's save the PID as worker PID.
Hey, Michael, can I ask a quick question while you're doing that?
Absolutely, please do, yes.
How important is it to understand how the underlying virtual machine works in order to develop with Elixir? Or at least to get started developing with Elixir?
Great question, because I realized I just kind of dove in here and started going wild. It depends on whether or not you consider yourself a completionist, I think would be my answer. I don't think it's super important. And again, that comes from I'm saying that from the perspective of if you want to dive in, you start playing around, seeing how things work and whatever. Obviously, you can do that without understanding a lot of the underlying clockwork or mechanics of the whole thing. There are definitely things that you're going to want to know, especially if you were going to build an Elixir app to run in production, right? And I'm certainly glossing over a ton of stuff right this minute. Happy to dive in anywhere where it would be helpful. All of this is making me realize that I will be a lot more prepared the next time I give this talk. But what I would say it's not super important. I think that the other thing I would say is that if you go and look at the docs for some of these things, they are unbelievably well written, and it makes it very clear what each of these things is and how it's working. So if you go look in the Elixir docs, and I'll just give you an example real quick. We won't get deep into it here, but if I go to, this was, again, actually, it's a good point to make. One of the other things that I loved about Elixir when I first started looking at it was that the docs for Elixir are in the same place as the docs for all the packages. So if you wanted to look up the docs for Phoenix, you'd be here on Phoenix. If Phoenix references something, in Elixir, like in a core, it's just right over here in Elixir. And these are the same. Like, it is awesome to me because it's just so easy to find things. So let's see, if we look in the supervisor documentation, and we can see all of these things related to processes and applications, and there are a number of additional abstractions that would, that can be looked at. But if you want to know more about how the application lifecycle works, these docs are awesome, right? The supervisor docs are super handy. The docs on Gen Server are another place to look that are super handy if you're looking to do that. But the other thing I would say, and maybe this is in retrospect, it's probably a bad place to start because there's too many things to get into when it comes to that. But like, here's an example that is, almost exactly where I was getting into. Here's one that implements a stack, right? So if we look and see, we can push and pop things, from the stack, and the code that that's written here is almost exactly like what I was about to write. And so there's a ton of examples. I don't think you have to get deep into it to be able to, you certainly don't have to get deep into it to be able to use it at all. And so if we wanted, like, if this was strictly from the perspective of like Phoenix, we could, and I could do that, right? I could just do a mix Phoenix.new, and we could start a Phoenix app, and we could start writing controller code, and we could jump right into that. You'd never touch OTP, right? You'd be using it across the board, but you yourself wouldn't write any of it. And I think most of the time that is where you would start. Under the hood, it's all Gen servers, right? Like, everything is a process. Every request that comes through the data structure you get that represents that request is connected to the process that the web server is handling. So you're using it all the time, but no, you only really start to interact with it if you want to, I guess. That's how I would put that. Does that help?
Yeah, very much.
Cool.
I was just like thinking, do I have a follow-up question? But actually, no. I think, yeah. What I was worried about was I would have to have some knowledge of how like these processes are working together or something like that in the background. But it sounds like maybe not.
Not as much as you might think just from what I started doing here.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, no problem.
Good enough for now.
Okay. And let me see, and some of this might be just because I'm a little, I'm admittedly a little all over the place with the way I was going about this. But let's see. What I wanted to show here was just that we have a process that's running, and that it has a name, or we gave it a name in this particular instance. And here's a PID that is like its ID. If I kill it, and I have to use the PID, I can't kill it by name. But if I say process exit and I give it that worker PID, and then I say, and we can just let it exit normally, right? So it exited. If I ask where that named process is now, we'll see that, wait, that's not what I expected to happen at all. Sorry, let's try it the other way. There we go. Okay, so normal exit, it was restarted through the, how did that work actually? When I exited it normally, the supervisor, you know what, I'm going to say it wrong no matter what I do here. So when I killed it, it started a new PID. It started a new process. So this is the supervisor at work for me, right? This is the counter.worker is a supervised process. The application is supervising it. So if it dies, then it will come back. So let's see. And what I was going to do here was just give you an example of what the server, so what can it do, right? So I've said this, I gave it a function called, there's a function called value. So can I run value? Oh, that's not great. Because we haven't implemented handle call 3. So what did I say here? Well, I said I wanted to do a value. I'm doing a gen server call. Again, these are just like gen server is just an abstraction over message passing between these processes. Under the hood, it's doing things like a send. You can send a message to a process, and a process can receive it by saying receive, and then they'll sit there and wait to get that message. So gen server is just like kind of holding your hand through all of that over the top of it, and there are even higher orders of hand-holding in things like agents and what have you. So the reason that this isn't doing anything is because I just defined like a public API method. I defined a method or function called value, right, to return me something. But it's trying to get in and do OTP things under the hood. And when it goes to do that, it tries to call handle call. Handle call is a callback for a gen server that's going to get, let's see, this is us. All right, from, and then, okay, this is my state here at the end. So like this is the count, and I'm going to return. Wow, have I completely lost my? So really, I want to return, I'm going to return the, I'm going to return the count, and then I'm going to store the count again. So this is the value that we're replying with. That's the value that's going to come back to the caller. This is the value that every time we call, we have to return the state again. So let me see if we can call it. I probably have to. Okay, so and I'll just do one more example, and then we'll move on to something more fun, which is Phoenix and all the fun LiveDashboardy things. So let's say I wanted to instead, I apologize. So the call, this was value. This is from. This is where it was from. That was really confusing if you didn't see that. It wouldn't have made any sense in just a second. So anyway, this is what I was looking for. So, and I'm gonna just run recompile to recompile that. So okay, what I wanted to do was I wanted to define an increment function, and this one is we're going to make a different call to the gen server. We're going to call the same module. We're going to call increment this time, and that's all it's going to get. We're just going to call increment. So now if I reload this one more time and I call counter.worker.increment, it's going to fail because we don't have a handle call for the increment. So I'll go add one. And now we'll see that here, I can see where it's from. I get the process back where the message is from. And you can do things like delay the reply and all sorts of other kind of stuff. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. So we're going to send the new count. So is count plus 1. And we're going to return the new count. There's a number of different, like one could look at this multiple ways. We could return what the current count was. We could increment it and return the old count, or we can return the new count and store the new count, which is what I'll go ahead and do. While I'm here, we can just go ahead and add the decrement as well. And obviously it's the same call. A similar way. So this is our public API, right? This is the thing that we can do. Anybody, technically speaking, you can call this from outside. Like, there's nothing stopping you. It's just nice to provide that, the interface there that you can document, and then not have to worry about like doing all of the handle calls. So I realize this is a super contrived example, but oops. Okay, so we've got our little incrementer decrementer worker here. And so now if I call counter.worker.increment, I can call that a couple times. I can call decrement a couple times, we can go ahead and do that. And when I call value, then I get, I get the current value back. So this is really, I mean, it's a really, really long-winded, you know, this is a little function that just stores a number, right? It stores some state, lets you move it up and down. So this is like just the basics of a gen server-y, you know, OTP. I need to store some state. And we can't, so all of those things in combination, this may feel like, I hope this was not a bad example or one that would deter you from using Elixir, because it is long-winded here, the way I went through it to set up just a counter, but hopefully it starts to show the pattern. What I like about this, or what the other thing that really drew me into it, was the idea that while yes, this may feel a little contrived for a counter, and it may feel like more work than necessary just for that. And I'm certain there's a shorter version of this, right? This is not the most optimized counter one could write in Elixir. But this pattern, the pattern that you see here, you'll see repeated all over the place when it comes to OTP things in the Elixir world. So a lot of the process lifecycle related stuff, it all works in the same kind of way. So once you start to grok it, once it starts to feel familiar, you'll see it everywhere, and that I think it makes it easy to continue getting involved in things, or continue, like, you gain knowledge in one area and that knowledge is applicable in another area, and I find that to be really cool. And it's helped me certainly to level up in my development within Elixir very quickly. So, all right, that said, let's switch to something a little bit more fun, because I feel like that got a little drony. Let's talk about Phoenix. So Phoenix is a web framework, and as Steven said, like, what, an hour ago? I apologize, I took forever with that. That, you know, web stuff, web-related development in functional languages is maybe not as prominent, it's surprising to me always to hear that, because I came in through Elixir and was like first introduced a lot, you know, via Phoenix. So to me, it's like, what do you mean? No, it's wonderful. It's like, it's right here. You can have it. It's for you. But that may not be, people may not be as familiar with it as I would like them to be. I think, you know, it's our understanding and whatever, the news is spreading. So hopefully more people will start to become familiar with Phoenix and also LiveDashboard, or I'm sorry, LiveView specifically. LiveDashboard is the sugar, is some sugar on top. But let me go ahead and start a Phoenix app so you can see what that looks like. And, you know, in that similar vein to what I was saying before, if I want a new app, a new Phoenix app, it's as simple as installing the archive and then running mix phoenix.new, and I will call my app Berlin Functional Programming Demo. And we'll go ahead and let it run and install the dependencies, and it'll take longer to install and compile Node than it will anything else. So just bear with us for a second here. Given we have, like, you know, 60 seconds or so, if there are other questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, we'll just wait for Node to compile real quick.
So even in your world, you have to wait forever for Node and npm packages to install.
Oh yeah, no doubt. So, and we, you know, and that's the thing. So LiveView, for those that aren't familiar, is a method for doing declarative development over, like the declarative web programming over sockets. So what we do is you load the page once, and we do a disconnected render for the page, and then once the page has loaded and the JavaScript has run, we do a connected mount and render, you know, cycle for that page. And then once you are live, once you have a live connection, then you are able to, and we do everything else over the WebSocket. So it's basically events in, and we diff the HTML back out. So the big killer feature there is the diffing actually that goes on, and the idea that we can, you know, rather than sending the entire HTML payload over the wire every single time, we only send what changed. And the actual diffing engine for that just keeps getting better and better. So we continue to send just the minimal amount of data that actually changed, you know, to load that into the page. So it's wild. And I need to, I guess, finish setting up gotta do a little bit here. So the Phoenix demo, or the Phoenix generator, Phoenix new by default, comes with boy. Okay, I think I forgot to run it with the LiveView stuff, so we can look at the dashboard, but I'll have to run it again for the other. So let me go ahead and I'll just do that now, and I can talk a little bit about LiveView. We can take a look at the example from the site. I need my live generator, so let's go back and add. We're still new enough that we don't default to installing. We install the dashboard for you because it doesn't require all of LiveView, but we don't by default install all of the LiveView configurations through the Phoenix installer unless you pass the live flag. So I'll just do that again real quick, and we'll pay that price one more time. But while we do, I can come over here and we can take a quick look at. So here's an example of, well, and so while the gen server stuff may have felt a little, like a little bit much for starters, I think the place where it becomes really interesting is when you start to see that the Phoenix LiveView and so actually follows the exact same pattern, because your LiveView is just another process. It is much like the counter worker that I wrote that's running. Granted, it's just one that's got a name, but this is just a generic process that is spawned when someone hits the page where this needs to be invoked, right? So when they're mounting the route that lands here, this is we're requesting the page that is that for this LiveView. We will spawn this process, and it will hold the state for whatever changes you want to make. So it's really like, it's truly not any different. It's the same kind of process, and it's just a lightweight beam process that is holding that state and sending the changes and the data over the wire when in response to your user's interactions on the page. So okay, that should be probably enough talking for this. So, and once again, I'll create a database. The default installer comes with, integration with Ecto, which is it's not an ORM, but it is our SQL package for dealing with databases. And there's support for Postgres, and now officially support for MySQL as well, if you're using that. Okay, so with that made, I should be able to, if we've installed all of our things, I should just be able to run Mix Phoenix server, and I should be able to get a server, and we will get our Phoenix page out of the box. And right here, so I wrote some code, and it took me forever to write a counter. Fortunately, I can just show you some of this without actually needing to write any more code right now. We can just kind of look at some of the code that we ship you with. So right here on the home page here of the generated app that we just created is this search box, and this is a live dependency search within our application. So quickly, because if you haven't seen it, I want to make clear where this data comes from. So I will go open our demo here in VS Code. I will jump into the Mix EXS file, which is the project setup for our application. Here you can see this is all generated, but we have our dependencies. So we load the Phoenix application, the Phoenix Ecto integration, which gives us some of our database integrations here. We have LiveView as a separate dependency, so it's not required to use Phoenix. Floki is an awesome library for doing some HTML parsing that is we use within the testing side of LiveView, but you can use it for a lot of different things. LiveDashboard is also a separate dependency, so it's not built into, you can use Phoenix without the dashboard. And the telemetry bits are related to some of the event aggregation and applications monitoring stuff that we do. Or I shouldn't say aggregation, but event propagation and application monitoring that you can do. So we'll take a closer look at that here in just a second. Anyway, so these are our dependencies. These are the dependencies that are within our app. So we can go over here to our live dependency search, and we can take a quick look and see that if we said like Phoenix, as an example, we can see these are the Phoenix applications that are a part of our app. And if we click on one and then say go over here, we can jump to straight to the docs for that. So, okay, well, neat. How are we doing that? But also, I mean, why is that cool? Well, one of the things that's cool about it is that all of that happened. So all of that interaction is done without writing a single line of JavaScript. So this is going to listen. If we take a look at the events themselves, we've got, So we can see that the form is augmented with some attributes for a change suggest and on submit search. And what we're going to see happen is that on the keystroke, we're going to pop off some different events, and we can see the reply as it comes over the wire for what was made available to us. And if you look to see if we can look at the diff, and I don't know how easy that is, it's way down the bottom of my screen. Let me see if I can pull it up here a little bit more. But we sent about the least amount of data that you could imagine that we sent over the wire. We sent each of the options, and then we sent one set of static data for building out the wrapper, like the HTML code around that. So how in the world is that possible? Let's take a look at the code. So Phoenix has a router, much like, you know, just about anything else that you'd see. We split, the application is split into two pieces. There's I called my project BFP demo. So we got a BFP demo context and a BFP demo web context, and all of our, you know, the vast majority of things live in the web directory. So here in our router, we can set up a pipeline for dealing with any number of things like layouts, sessions, you know, flash data, accept headers, all those kind of things. We can pipe any of our routes through these plugs. Plug, if you're unfamiliar, is it's essentially a short version is it's middleware for, you know, for these requests. So plug is really what Phoenix is based on top of. Phoenix is a plug-based web framework, and so plug is a package within Elixir to handle connections from a web server. So plug gives you a con data structure, which holds your request data, you know, your params, the paths, all the stuff, you know, the request body and what have you, and can send responses. And Phoenix builds up on top of that. So we have lots of different plugs here. A pipeline, this is a macro, so we have a little bit of meta code that's going to generate some code for us. The pipeline with its plugs becomes, you know, it's essentially a set of like a middleware pipeline that's going to be run through before we hit our route. So here in the router, we have this the live route is for LiveView. We pull up our page live, which is this LiveView here, and it uses this template. So the code for that search that we were just looking at is this form right here. We have this data list where so here's our for comprehension for the results. So for every result, we're going to get the app, and we get a version, but we're not using it. So we print the app value here, we print the app name here, and you can see that this is the amount of dynamic code on that page, right? There's a little here if you want to, we're doing some get text for some internationalization, but in truth, we have two pieces of dynamic code for that box. We have the query itself, right? Like what's the value in the input, and then the data list results. And they're pulled from, so the form interaction or form integration here happens on, Phoenix change happens on any change. It connects to the onChange event in the form, and submit, as you would expect, connects to the submit event. And what that translates to on the server side are these handle event callbacks. So very similarly to, we looked very quickly earlier at the idea of a handle call, right? Handle event is, again, is a higher order abstraction over, you know, the idea of something akin to a handle call. There's also handle cast, which is async. And then another one that I think we ran into here earlier, there's a handle info, which is more of messages that are sent directly. They're all effectively the same thing. These are messages that land in a process mailbox. So for these messages to our live view, we may get the event suggest, which we saw was the change event. So we get this anytime the form changes. Now that form only has one input, so it's just strictly when typing, basically, I'm going to get these suggest messages. And if we go back and look at page live, I believe we'll see that the name of the input is Q. So we get this as a map of form data, right? We get the query that you provided here. So we will assign that to the socket, and these assignments here are what actually drives the page changing. So it's declarative in the sense, so when we mount the page, we set the query as empty and the result is an empty map. So there's no data, which is what we see when we load the page, right? There's no data, there's nothing in here, therefore there's no options to show for that data list. When we begin to type, the very first time I type a character in this box, we can see that, well, we can see it if I have the tab open. We can see that typing a character sends a message to the server over the socket. So we sent a form message, and it told us that the target, so the field that was being changed was Q, the name of the field, and it also told us, you know, what Q's value is. And from that message, we received a diff of our page, right? So that interaction resulted in this change over the wire, which then led to, you know, what I see like visibly represented here as a list of those selections. So now if I select one, you'll see the same thing. We got another one. There was a suggest sent with the full text, you know, Phoenix LiveDashboard, and again we got a diff back. This diff is only has one, you know, one value in it because we only have one match for the full Phoenix LiveDashboard string. When I hit submit, because submit is, unless I'm being silly here, yeah, this is the submit button, right? So with submit, we're going to get what happens on submit. So it still gets the full, you know, the whole of the form data, and so it's going to look for a, so it's going to run the search, the same function that we ran to get the results here. And instead of just assigning the results to the query after, you know, I'm sorry, assigning them to the socket, which is just to say, hold on to this data, right? We're returning some state here. We're updating, we're augmenting the socket, which is our state, and we're returning it, which is the same, you know, very similar to the OTP pattern that we saw earlier when I incremented or decremented the count. I replied with both the new count, and then I stored my state, you know, in that third argument. Here it's just the two because there's no reply. In this case, instead of assigning, when we get a search back that matches, right? We did a search. If we ran a search, this is pattern matching again. This is pattern matching with a pinned argument. So we have the query that we pattern matched on here. We're reusing that in our response here. We pin that. So if it's exactly the same, if when we did this search, we got back the same thing that came through from the user, then this is a pattern match on the key in the map and the value, which was then called version. And so we use that to redirect to that page in the documentation. If we look for something, and so this pattern match will match within a map. So we're digging into the map to see if the key exists and is the same as what we asked for. And then we're pattern matching to hold on to the version so that we can use it again. If we don't have one of those, means the map that came back from search didn't include that value, right? It could include other values, but it didn't include that key. Then we say, well, we didn't find a match for that, and we set the results back to empty. So if I were to type and then not select anything and hit foo, see, I'm going to get that. So here's my flash message. No dependencies found matching. So, yeah, that is the LiveView pattern. That is the way we handle declarative. It's an event in, you get some data, we send updates to the page. Basically, you're just assigning new data to the page. You change the data structure by assigning new data, and we use that information to take a diff of this, you know, what is rendered here, and return it to the client over the wire. The way that that's possible is that so I guess one thing I'm trying to think of the best way to put it is just to say that, so Phoenix LiveView is not HTML aware, right? We're not parsing first semantics here. What we are doing is looking at the difference between what part is dynamic and what part is static. So we can take a look at this and we can say, you know, well, excuse me, this bit is dynamically generated, so we need to treat that differently. We need to look for just changes in these values that are being referred to. Whereas the rest of the page, you know, or the pieces that have, you know, all of this data is static. It will never change. It doesn't have the capacity to change. It doesn't refer to a variable. So we only ever have to send it down the wire once, right? We send it the very first time, and then that's it. And it won't change again. We won't have to render it again. So the other so LiveView is obviously a huge feature, and having the live generators available, this is probably the bigger feature within here. So I'll show this off quickly as well. So when you use Phoenix 1.5 and generate with the live generator, you can run phoenix.gen.live. Now I will say, so the person who introduced me to Elixir, his name was Vinny Franco, and he was a Rubyist at the time. I think he's still probably doing quite a bit of Ruby. But he really liked it, and came from that, knew Jose from the Ruby core team, and was really interested in Elixir. But he was, I was never a big Ruby fan, and so that at first was not for me, it wasn't really a turn on, right? It was a bit of a turn off, right? I was like, okay, it's like Ruby. And he's like, no, it's not like Ruby. You should check it out though, because it's got like the syntax is nice, and I do love the syntax. But yeah, so it's but the thing that I didn't like about one of the things I didn't like about Rails, or coming from that world, was like just all of the scaffolding, really. And maybe I may have a misconception of how that actually worked, but to me it felt like I was like, nope, there's too much magic. I don't like it. Generators in Phoenix felt that way until I understood that they weren't actually magic. It was just code that wrote code. And so you can change it and you can do whatever you want with it. But sometimes it's helpful, even if you don't want to use it, just to run the generated code and to kind of see what you get, because it kind of exposes some patterns that are available. So if I run mixed help for phoenix.gen.live, we'll get just a massive amount of information about the generators related. I'm just going to literally run the example right from here, because I just want to have something to show y'all. So we're going to run this example. It's going to create a context called accounts, within there a user, and it's going to, with just a couple of fields for like name and age. And so we'll start with that, and we can see by running the generator, so we got a whole bunch of stuff, out of the box. We get different pages for listing and showing those. We get a form for filling some of that out. We get, because it's the first time we ran this, we drop a tiny little modal component into your application, so it's fully customizable, but we give you something out of the box to work with. And because this is also this is all data backed and generating a live. Using the generators gives me schema data as well if I want it. So this, I've got a full-blown migration and all the other fun that came right out of here. So it's saying to me that I need to add these live routes, because it's the live generator. So I'm going to add these routes to my router, and I'll go ahead and jump over and do that. And we'll just toss them right here after, that piece. So we can just toss this in. So we've got a users page, new. Obviously, we're going to be able to edit, it looks like, from that front page. And then we've got showing a specific user, and then we've got a separate edit page for showing on the edit. And that'll make more sense here, I think, in a second. But so if I do that and I come back over here and I can go ahead and run, migrate to, if you haven't seen it, I'm going to Ecto migrations. We can see what's actually there. It needs run. Okay, so just the one. So go ahead and do that. And I would be remiss if I didn't show you one of my favorite features about 1.5, but to do that, I got to roll back that migration. So let's see, my migration is down. I haven't run it. My database is empty. I have no users. I think I turned my server off so we could run that command. Let me go ahead and start the server again. Let's pop over here, and there are pending migrations for the repo. So I could go back to the server, or I could go back to the command line and run it, or I could just run it here. And so that's just that's magic to me, but it's amazing. So that's a dev feature. Obviously, it's not something we do in a production environment, but if you're running in dev and we see there's pending migrations, we can give you the ability to run those migrations, and then we'll reload the server for you. So just a time saver, but it's a super helpful one. Okay, so with that up, I now have more paths. I should be able to go /users, and so now we've got another live view. And here we can we can create a new user. So I'll make one for me, you know, and then I can make another one for Steven. And I can, you know, I've got flash messages that I can clear. I can head over here and like, maybe I want to edit, you know, that. So we can view it. We can move over here. We can edit from here. And you see, so this is the modal component that we drop in, is to actually handle. So every action that's taking place here is trying to be a good citizen of the internet as well, right? So we're trying to be good web citizens. These are all, this is uses HTML5 push state, you know, throughout. So any change that you're making to the state of the thing, we're actually updating the URL as well. So if I'm trying to edit this user, so we see that this is, I'm editing on the show page. If I wanted to go back, and if I was editing from the index, you see that's its own route. So if I wanted to take this and move over here and, you know, open it back up, we're right where we left off. So as you're, you know, you have the ability within LiveView to be able to handle, you know, refreshing or reloading state for a user, so that when people are sharing links or doing different things like that, you know, they're not just getting to a page or close to what you were looking for. You know, ideally you can get them right at the content that they were being shared. Okay, so that, I mean, that is the basics of the LiveView. I could go into like a whole bunch more detail, but these are some of the things that you just get out of the box. So we've got generators for doing the live code. If you'd like to take a quick, I can pop in here and we can take a look at what some of this code looks like. So we have our mount, and on mount we grab our users list. So mount runs twice, but it runs twice because there's the disconnected and then the connected render. Take a look at the docs for caveats to some of that, but the idea is that your pages should work even without JavaScript. Like the interactions wouldn't necessarily work in that same way, but you know, you've got we load the same content on a disconnected render that we do on the connected render. So, you know, for SEO purposes and all those other kinds of things, your cold mount and render are the same as the live one. But from there, we can, you know, this is showing that we are applying actions within the view. So a single live view, much like a controller, could have separate actions that are occurring. And so we can see that, you know, creating a new user from the home page is an action. Index, new, and edit, much like you'd see in a controller or like CRUD, you know, CRUD resource kind of things. Same concept here, and we're modifying, augmenting, you know, which thing happens. So there's a number of callbacks for dealing with parameters, dealing with, you know, reloading the page. Handle params is what happens when you change the URI for push state. So we mount once, again, technically twice, disconnected and connected mount. But then handle params happens anytime the URL changes, so long as you're staying on the same page. So it's a single process, continues to maintain its state until the time when you leave or go somewhere else, and that would be to go to another live view. In the case of, like, say, well, that's a redirect away. If I redirected to a local page that was a different live view process, it would actually, it shuts down the process you're on, it moves you to the other, you know, you move to the other process on the redirect. Otherwise, it just keeps the same process alive, and it's very much like an SPA, if you will, but it's server side. Okay, so without further ado, let me show you the thing that I built that I think is super fun, and we can get. So again, this also, whoops, wrong thing. This comes out of the box. So I've got, you know, we've added a few tools here to our baseline site that I created, right? Or that, you know, that we generated. We've got our basic Phoenix app. It has some search stuff, which is fun. But it also comes out of the box with LiveDashboard. And this is the tool we wrote. And I will say right off the top here, this LiveDashboard is not meant to be like any sort of APM replacement, right? It's not to keep you from, you know, needing to pay for New Relic for your, you know, for your production organization, right? Or if you're, you know, your big super expensive thing. It is a learning tool. It is a tool, you know, that can provide you a lot of information. And my hope within the bit that's for like metrics and actual APM related stuff is that it can help you kind of prove out what it is you want to use when doing real application performance monitoring, you know, at a production level. So hopefully, I mean, I'd save you some time, save you some money or some, you know, deployment pain in determining what the, you know, what metrics do you actually want to look at? What do you want to track? Because you can prove that out here locally or even in a staging environment through LiveDashboard, where it's totally ephemeral, right? Like we don't hold on to any data. You have what you have while you're on the page. Now, truth be told, but let me show you what that means before I get ahead of myself. So, okay, so we can see right off the bat. So this is some. We generate some metrics for you out of the box so that you have some charts. But all of this is fully customizable. So, and it's built off of what is called telemetry. And telemetry is an Erlang library, so it works across the whole of the Beam or the Erlang ecosystem. And it is meant to be able to emit data at particular moments in the application lifecycle, so you can get some more information out. So a ton of Elixir libraries are already using telemetry for this purpose, and if they are, then you can integrate with telemetry metrics within your application. So quickly, I'll jump over here and show what this looks like in the code. Our integration for LiveDashboard is basically just this. We import the router, and we set up a LiveDashboard path, and we tell it where to get its metrics. And this telemetry module contains the actual definitions for these telemetry metrics. So we've got some here for, you know, breaking out the query times, VM, you know, memory usage, and some just quick methods or quick data, quick events for Phoenix. There's a lot more available within Phoenix, but this is just kind of baseline, you know, duration from the endpoint and from the router. A lot of functionality in here, a lot of things you can do. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions and stuff, so we can always come back to this, but you can do some periodic measurements. You can add, again, this is all customizable, and anything that you put in here, any metrics that you define, we can then graph over here on the dashboard. So what that looks like in practice is that if I want to look at just, you know, some of the query times, we can see that if I hit the users page, we can see that we get some queries. And, you know, and some timing for those. And if we continue to, you know, click around, we'll see that we continue to see you know, queries, and then the breakdown of where you know, whether it was, like, this is the total amount of time that everything took to run each query. Then there's the query time, how long it was queued, and, you know, how long it took to decode. So might be more fun to look at than just the database ones, which don't maybe mean a whole lot without being able to see the queries that were run, because those are just kind of like super generic, but we can get some idea of, if we look at the Phoenix tab, we'll be able to see, these are just like requests, and so then the duration of our different web requests. And here we've got one that's faceted by route, so we can see users, or, you know, was I hitting users IDs. So if I just sit here and reload the page, you know, we can get all kinds of good data. So beyond, and then the virtual machine metrics are just going to give a, like, these are periodic, so they'll run, I think it's set to run right now like every 5 seconds, and we'll get some amount of information out on, like, how much, you know, memory usage. These are, you know, customizable to the extent of, like, you can change the like what unit of measure you want to see some of that stuff in. And we just recently merged some code, I think even just earlier this week, to provide a little bit of historical data within the metrics. So as I said before, the metrics are like totally ephemeral right now. They're just what you see while you're here. In fact, if I switch tabs even, and I come back, we're gonna lose that data, because these are live redirecting. Keeping in mind that, like, every data point that comes through gets saved. You know, we're holding on to it, and we, you know, ideally you don't want to bloat the whole thing, whether that's your client, you know, just the browser itself, or the server. So we try not to hold on to the metrics for too long or keep too much on any single page. it's totally customizable though. Like you can group them in whatever method makes sense to you. We by default we just logically group them by the first like the prefix bit of the event name. But anyway, within the newer tools for the like historical data, you have to kind of set it up yourself. Like you'll need to. We just basically gave you the integration points, but you would define like where your data storage is. Like if you want to hold on to stuff, you would need to basically be listening for the events and keeping track of them, and then when the server starts back up or whatever, replaying those events through to get them to show back up on the dashboard. So that ability now exists if you want to do it. The other really cool functionality from this is just the ability to do query or like request logging straight from the dashboard here. So if you just want to really get down to see like one particular request, if you've got a bug or you've got, you want to take a look and see what's happening with it, what queries are being run, what have you, you can add it to your, let's see if this one's actually going to work because it's in the live view and we don't necessarily get, I was afraid of that. Okay, so we could see what it loaded when we first loaded the page. We can see that we got that. I wonder if I'll get it from if I do it as part of the cookie, I might see more. So okay, I can enable a cookie, which should then mean that I'll get all of the things as I move around within the page. So you can see that I start to get all of the logs related to the things that were run. I don't think I'm going to get this one when I update it, and that's, oh no, I did. Okay, so anyway, so you can drill down if you need to be able to look and just try and identify one particular problem or what have you, and you know trying to spelunk through all of your logs doesn't isn't super effective. You can grab a one of these request logger params and be able to take a closer look at just the logs for a single request. Okay, so quickly, because I'll try and start wrapping up here in case there are questions. The other kind of very cool things in the dashboard just out of the box are we got a lot of information related to the application itself. And so we can see these are all of the applications within the Elixir applications or Erlang applications that are running within my app, the app that we generated here. And so we see like BFP demo itself, and given that is our application, it's got the biggest tree. So here is the supervision tree. And hopefully the visual representation of this, I'll find a smaller one so it's easier to see, but hopefully the visual representation of this will be handy for what I was talking about before, like way back with the applications and stuff. Just in that this is our, there's our application supervisor that's running, that has all of the other, bits and pieces underneath it, where that was way too big to be able to, having a hard time being able to see all the pieces, but we can, let me see if I can find a better way. I think I'll be submitting a bug report. So let's see. Scroll it over a bit, I'll come back up. You can see our repo for the the database. We've got our telemetry process. That's our telemetry supervisor that's running to handle all of our metrics and things being available. Any of our other processes that are running. We've got our PubSub supervisor that's for sending, being able to do PubSub distributed messaging that way. Lots of unnamed processes related to the web, the endpoint, which is like your head end for everything request related. A lot of things live underneath that. So, and we can do this for any of these that have a supervision tree. We can take a look and see like what are they running. Okay, so here's Cowboy. Cowboy is the web server. So not a lot. There's a supervisor process I see, 10 o'clock. We can look at that for just about any of these bits and pieces. So you can actually get in and see, what does your application look like? And this bit is very similar to another tool, if you're familiar with the Elixir or the Erlang ecosystem, called Observer. An Observer is something that's notoriously difficult to run in your like production environment because you need to get a remote console. So you're going to need to tunnel somehow into your application and make sure you can get securely get in there. So now, fortunately, we can you can get to at least some of that data that you would be able to get right here through the dashboard without needing to dig quite that deeply, or with that much configuration like to get it set up. In a similar vein, we have tables here for being able to see processes, ports that are running. You know, ports connect to other types of things like Unix sockets and stuff like that. Sockets within, you know, if we're doing TCP, you know, UDP kind of connections there. And then ETS is in memory, basically in memory tables. Without getting deep into that, it's data storage, like key value sorts of things. That a lot of, you can see that if you're not familiar with it, and it's something that I'm not super familiar with, I mean, I've played around a little bit, I know it gets used a lot. You can see here that it gets used a lot. There's a lot of different places that are, you know, within your application, even if you're not using it. Speaks to the question before of how much of this do I need to know, right? Well, you don't need to know anything about ETS to see that your, you know, a lot of places within your application are using ETS for in-memory data. All right, so that's the bulk of things. I apologize for the little bit spastic nature of this talk. I was very much excited to join you all today and to be able to chat about things. I hope it was beneficial. I hope it was helpful. I hope it makes you more interested or piques your interest or curiosity in Elixir and the Phoenix framework. And I do hope you'll try it out. You'll give it a shot. You'll maybe download it and see, you know, make an app real quick and see just how easy it is to really get started and dive in, and just how much functionality, you know, we try and provide you out of the box. Before I call it quits, I will show one last thing, because there's this is just eating at me, that I want you to think there's something hard here you have to do to get more data. So OS data, this is something I learned about just out of the process of creating the dashboard. Someone else wrote this code. I did not provide it, but just to find out that it was even possible to do this. So if you want to know more about the OS that's running, you can start the OSMon application. This is baked in. This is just available as part of the bean. So all you have to do to use it is add this line of code right there. If you want to even call that a line of code, add the atom OSMon to this line here in extra applications. And suddenly when I start the server, come on. Suddenly, hey, there we go. Check that out. So now we're going to get all of this data straight from the beam, where it's going to expose, you know, information on our disks and their utilization, the, you know, different where the process time is going, what our load averages are, and even some memory. And you can, you know, modify the refresh rate of these things to get it a little bit more often. So yeah, so this is all, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of the phrase like you get this for free, but you kind of do. And so it's all there for you to consume. The data is available. There is a wealth of stuff that you can do within here that I only started to scratch the surface of. So I do hope you'll take a chance to kind of dive in more yourself. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or chat about anything, really anything. Thank you all very much.
Oh, thank you, Michael, very much. That was great. I'm intrigued. I can speak for myself. As soon as I find like 5 minutes of free time in my life, this is very high on my list of things to try out. I especially love the
Cool.
the dashboard. That looks really handy.
Thank you. Yeah, it certainly, you know, shortly after building it, I was working on an application, and I wouldn't even necessarily call it a bug. It was just an annoyance. Like something was like hanging a bit on a search, and I couldn't figure out why. And I went and checked the dashboard, and lo and behold, I was popping off 4 or 5 or 6 searches, you know, every time I went to do it, because I had forgotten to debounce the input for the LiveView. And it was just nice. It was just a nice thing that happened, you know, that I was like, oh, that actually improved my day, right? Like the dashboard caught my problem, even though it wasn't necessarily a bug, right? But it was easy to see.
If you're saving time in the development process, I mean, that's super valuable. So
Yeah.
we do have some questions coming in.
Awesome.
First is from Tolgay. I think this is related to what you were showing about CPU metrics. Maybe it's like a little bit more than that. Tolgay, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah. Hey, Michael.
Hello.
It's been great so far.
Thank you.
I was checking out the LiveDashboard, and a couple of days, but I'm actually looking for creating some kind of protocol, like based on dispatches based on the energy usage of the machines, say Raspberry Pi. So some search result would, be directed to that machine, but I want to do it like environmental friendly and try to maybe monitor beforehand to those machines. I think it just, gives info about application metrics, but also more. But the energy usage has, other parameters, and maybe there's just a Elixir library for that. So I could just get that metrics into this dashboard. I don't know. How would you do that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of pieces to that. If the first, so getting the data in to the dashboard, depending on how you can read it, right, would be fairly straightforward. I think you could do that with, if you had a way to measure, if you already had a way to measure the energy usage, then reporting it to the dashboard, like say through metrics, would be pretty straightforward. And in fact, I think I was reading ahead. I think there may be another question in that vein. I'm happy to show an example of what something like that might look like. To add it though, if you wanted something that was more, like if you wanted it to act more like the, say the OS data page, or even like the processes table or something like that, I think we're probably still a little bit far away from being able to do that within the dashboard proper. I know there's an open issue about creating some more generic components so that we can hopefully eventually get to a place of doing more plugin related sorts of things. So you could add your own page, to the dashboard. We didn't want to go right there off the bat because there's a lot of coupling that could happen to, the components that are there for the dashboard versus what someone might want to use within their own, page or plugin. So that's still a little, not all the way fleshed out yet. We're still trying to figure out what exactly that would look like. But the one place where you do have the ability to customize some stuff is within the metrics, because you can define anything that you want really within, as long as it fits that paradigm, right? So you're sending, even if it's periodically, right, you're sending data to the chart and it will then be graphed. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Great. It's a good start. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next is Theo.
Thank you, Stephen. Michael, thank you very much for the chat. We really appreciate what you guys are doing there. And I love working with Elixir. So I've got a quick question. I've been aware of the dashboard, but I haven't used it myself to add any metrics. So how would you go about adding something as simple as just like a count of the users? So it might be a periodic check, or it can be, I think it will probably be a periodic check.
Yeah, absolutely. For that one, you would definitely want to do it periodically. And I'll tell you, I'll just go ahead and show you a quick example, because it's fairly straightforward, and I can do it from what we had already set up. So I have a library that I wrote. I did a talk for the Lone Star Elixir conference back in February, right before I stopped leaving my house, and I did something talking about batch operations with Broadway, and I actually wrote a front end to graph these things out. So I may go ahead and open that code up, because why not? But in the meantime, let me show you what that might look like here. So there's a couple of different pieces at play to be able to do this. But if you're using the generator in there, and you, like, if you create a new Phoenix app, if you're using the latest installer, you're going to get all this out of the box. If you don't, or if you haven't, you want to add it to an existing app, there's actually not that much to it. And you can actually should probably put together a little primer for that to make life a little bit easier. But basically, you need to install the live dashboard and the telemetry dependencies, and you need a supervisor that basically looks like this, right? It's a regular supervisor. But we start the polar. Telemetry polar is the important part for being able to do periodic things. So we start a polar process here, and we tell it how often we want it to poll, right? And so it's going to poll right now it's just set to poll every 10 seconds. I will, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to drop it down to like 2 seconds. And the things it uses to pull from are these periodic, like it's whatever this function returns, right? It's the list of measurements returned here. And so periodic measurements, we just defined down here, which right now is empty. To your question, the example here around how to count users, let's count some users. So this says here in our little helper doc, so we need a module function and arguments to be invoked periodically. The function, meaning this one here that we're defining, this function needs to call telemetry.execute. And then, so it's going to do what the other things in the code, other places like in Phoenix, we execute for the endpoint stop, right? And in Phoenix, we execute the endpoint router dispatch. What we're going to need to do is inside this count users function that we're going to write, we're going to need to execute some event. And then we're going to convert up here in our metrics function, we're going to convert that event into a metric that we want to chart, like that we want to graph on the database, or I'm sorry, graph on the charts. So what I'm going to do is, I guess I'll go ahead and still call this, I'll put it under the database side of things, but I'm just going to do a counter. They're all the same. I mean, they're not all the same. They have different functionality, but I don't know that we're going to get anything more or less out of any one of them. But so let me call this, I'll call it BFP demo web, since that's where it's going to come from. And we'll call it count users. And I'm just going to say total. And hopefully this will all make a little bit more sense when we actually write the code. But I'm going to give it a name that is the metric name and the event name aren't exactly the same. What this, for this example, ultimately my metric name, I'm sorry, the telemetry event is going to be BFP demo web.count users. And the metric, or the measurement that I care about inside of it is called total. In the same way, these ones that came out of Ecto, oops, I can move this, I'll put it up. Custom metrics. This one here, these that came out of Ecto, the event is bfp demo.repo.query. Total time, decode time, query time, queue time, and idle time are all the measurements within that single event, right? So we took one event here and we expanded it into five different metrics. So I'm going to add this count users total here, and then let's go write this function really quick. So, and if it's demo, it's going to BFP demo web. This is not where I would ever put this code. So I don't want to use that as an example. This is like, this module is kind of your head-end web context. I don't actually want to put that there. So I'm going to move it over to BFP demo, which is the one that's in my, just like, right, it's not my web context because this is a call to my database. So I'm going to go over here to this nice, happy, empty module that we generate for you, and I'll put it in here instead. So let's call it count users. And we can give it a doc real quick that says, emits, what do I call it? BFP demo web dot count users. And we're literally going to run a query. So can let's see, I don't think I have any, I'll have to, apologies because I didn't, well, no, wait, I did generate a context. So we should be able to say BFP demo.accounts.list users. And even though it's like a really, it's a really, really inefficient query to run, right? For this purpose, I can just do that, right? So here's a fun little pipeline too. So I'll get the users and I'll just pipe it the length. So I have the length, and then I'm going to execute a telemetry event. So telemetry.execute, and I'm going to give it the name, which in this case, it wants it as a list of atoms, which is fine. I'll do BFP demo web, and then this is count users. And the measurements then is a map. and the map, we're going to give it total is the atom, and I'm going to put the count right there, or we can call this total if it helps to just make things the same. Okay, so from there, so I'm going to get the count, or I'm going to get the total amount of users, and I'm going to execute that as an event called BFP demo web count users, and I'm going to send the measurement along as the total, and so that's its name. And so we can see then that BFP demo web count users total becomes my metric name over here, BFP demo web count users total. So now I should get that value. We should just see that come through as a new chart. It'll be on its own. It's on its own graph. So let's see if I can. I'll close that down here, so I don't have to keep switching windows. And let me go ahead and start my server down here. Okay, so at this point, what we should get is every 2 seconds, we should see BFP demo web. Okay, so it's going to do a request every 2 seconds for count users. And if we go back over here, we can take a quick look, and you can actually see, you know, since Ecto like debugging's on, right? So I'm seeing in the logs, right? It's running that query. It's running, you know, select splat from users to give me a count, right? But I could write a more efficient query and it'd be the same thing. But so now you can see that this will, I move this over here and let's go create another user, right? So we have 2. I'll go create another one. And now we have 3. We need to do a little bit. So we built this thing and it's super generic, right? We built a system that should be able to generically handle any metrics whatsoever. But because it's so generic, there are certain conveniences that, you know, we just haven't worked in yet, like the fact that this is a count, right? We're never going to have 2.7 users in our system. But the way that the chart library, which is called uplot, by the way, and the creator of uplot has been a huge help in working with like performance and just, you know, making sure that these charts really work, like are helpful and work well even under load, right? Even under a ton of data. So, but you know, obviously our counter needs to be a little more. It would be nice if it was a little bit more specific to a counter, because, you know, like I said, we're not going to have 2.7 users. We'll only ever have 2 or 3. So it'd be nice to, you know, clean that up a little bit. But anyway, and then if I start deleting folks, we'll see that these will, you know, it'll drop its way back down. So that's a custom metric.
That is amazing. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have another question from Lucas, but Lucas doesn't have a microphone, so I'm going to read it, and I hope it makes sense to you.
No worries.
So OTP seems like a good way to run a supervisor and then start multiple instances of workers instead of running, say, a load balancer and multiple servers, comparing with PHP, for example. How easy is it to do this multi-instance configuration with Phoenix, or did I get it wrong and we should go with a load balancer?
Okay, I think let me see. I'll preface with saying, don't just take my word for it. You know, get some more info. But I think what you're asking leads me to say that, one, if you looked at your web server and said, okay, well, how many, if we're using PHP as an example, how many concurrent requests can I handle? You know, with my PHP server, right? Given how long, you know, that request is held open or whatever, how long, you know, other requests are waiting. You know, what can I get away with? Odds are, whatever that number is, it's going to be lower, right? Or it's going to be higher for a Phoenix application. And I realize it's a really generic thing to say, right? Like, what are we comparing? But because the process, just strictly because the processes are lighter weight, I think you can have more that way, because we're not spawning OS processes all the time. You're spawning Beam processes, which are significantly more lightweight. But in truth, I think, I mean, it's not really a replacement for a load balancer. I wouldn't necessarily put it that way. But what Elixir does, or what the Beam does, I mean, it's all about concurrency, right? So the idea of the language in general, and it's another huge selling point that I totally glossed over. But the reason, it's my understanding of it, so hopefully he won't tell me later that I was putting words in his mouth. But when I hear Jose Valim talk about why he wrote Elixir, my understanding is it's because working in, you know, in a model that wasn't concurrent by default just wasn't going to work for us moving forward, right? We needed a programming model that was concurrent out of the box, that had the ability to handle more than one thing at a time effectively. So that's what Elixir can do. We don't have to, that's what the Beam can do without resorting to threading. And I'm not a theoretical computer person at all, so I haven't gotten, like, I don't do deep down in the depths of all the stuff. Like I think of myself more as a plumber than than anything else. But it's, we have that model where you can do more than one thing at a time. You can do things concurrently. You can start a bunch of processes, asynchronously to go do work and then let you know when they're done. And it's, I don't know, you probably, if you have enough traffic, you probably will ultimately still need a load balancer somewhere along the line. But there's also, the other side of it is really when you get into doing distributed things and you can do clustering within OTP. And it's worth mentioning too, like there's no real need to separate the idea of Erlang and OTP. Like it's all the same thing. You get it with the language. It's all just right there. It's not something you have to go out and get separately, right? It's just baked in. So, but being able to then cluster those things as well. So even if you've got distributed traffic, if you needed to distribute it across the load balancer, there's nothing stopping you from having the servers behind that load balancer clustered to where they can communicate with one another, if necessary, and possibly even share information in whatever way.
Okay, so I have a comment from Daryl, and I have to read it for him as well. He doesn't have a microphone.
No worries.
Daryl wanted to elaborate on, you earlier recommended or someone had recommended, maybe you did, and he said, yeah, I agree, the Pragmatic Studio classes.
Yes.
Yeah, he wanted to elaborate on that. He says their Elixir OTP course is very deep, but goes step by step in introducing new material. That applies to their Phoenix course too. I used what I learned to build a real-time web app with a Phoenix backend and a React front end that uses GraphQL, including subscriptions. I actually think that's very cool. GraphQL with subscriptions is something I'm interested in. And Ralph in the chat had some interesting remarks. So I wanted to invite Ralph to respond to Daryl's comment. And then Michael, if you have a response, then we have a virtual, almost real life type discussion.
Yeah, I love it.
Hi, Michael. Hi. Yes, I made some Elixir programming, and I have sent some chat to Daryl that there was this wonderful testing feature from Jose for this LiveView things. Can you show a little bit? It's really impressive. So if you can show some unit testing with LiveViews.
Oh, yeah.
You know this?
Yeah. I'd be happy
nice.
to. Absolutely.
It's absolutely fantastic. So if somebody can see this, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's super fun. And it's another one of those like total lifesaver things. Well, yeah, that's a little bit strong. But I mean, in the sense of like what I was doing, I was working on a thing and I came across where I hit an error and I was surprised by the error, and then I looked at the error a little more closely and it was telling me exactly what I did wrong, and I was very happy about that. So yes, I'd be happy to show that. To Daryl's comment, one, that's so awesome. I was working on a GraphQL-ish thing recently myself, so that's super cool, and congrats on that. And yes, the Pragmatic Studio courses specifically, Mike Clark over there has been doing some really, really awesome things. And if you want to hear from someone who can really get into the depths of, like, my understanding is those courses, you'll actually build up some of those abstractions, by hand, right? So rather than just jumping to what I did, which was like, here's an app supervisor and here's a gen server and look how I do magic, right? You're going to get in there and understand how that actually works under the hood, because again, it's not something different, right? It is gen server, and all of those things are just abstractions. They're just more, sugar on top of what's already there, and the basic idea of message passing between processes in the Beam. So it's super cool, and the more you understand it at a lower level, I mean, I think it's good to have that knowledge. I don't think you need it to go build a web app in Phoenix, right? Like you can start, and you can start up here and you can work your way down. The nice thing is that at every level you gain more knowledge that continues to be applicable, you know, the more you move forward. What can I show quickly on testing? You know what? I bet there's some code I can just jump to and we can show, because another nice thing about the generators is you get tests generated as well. I'm not screen sharing. So if we jump down into like one of the live, so here's the user live test that was generated for us. And just looking at a example here that is probably one that's a lot. Okay, here. So just taking just this test in isolation, like let's just look at this one. So if we look at just this test right here, so saves a new user. So what are we going to do? All right, so we start the test and we get some context immediately. So we have our con. This is our data structure that represents the request. When we call the live function or macro here in the test, what we're doing is we're simulating the connected and, or I'm sorry, the disconnected and then the connected mount and render for the page. So the return is the tuple of, you know, okay, and the LiveView process, so that we can work with, we can use to talk to it, and then the initial rendered HTML, which we're just ignoring right now. But this functionality, and I'm going to go ahead and drop it down onto other lines so you can see it, is to say that we're going to use this element API, and this is what Ralph was referring to with the expressive. This element API within the LiveView test is just super cool. So it uses Floki under the hood, which is, like I said, the HTML parsing library that we were talking about, to be able to say that from this LiveView, we want to go get a hold of an A, like an A tag that has the text new user. And when we get a hold of that, then we're going to click on it. We're going to click on it. And this is asserting that once we've done that, that the string new user is contained within the response. So like 4 lines, we have asserted that there's an element on the page, you know, of this tag, that it contains this text, that we were able to click on it, which means it had the Phoenix click attribute on it, and that in so doing, it returned HTML that contained new user, and then we're going to assert that we were patched, meaning we were HTML, you know, HTML push state ran, and that we landed on the new path, as opposed to where we started, which was the index path. So any one of these things changes, it's no longer true. And oh, sorry, because I moved all that stuff. So if I try and find one of these with you know, let me see. So if I run, I'm just going to run this test, test PFP demo web live user live test, and we're gonna, when it compiles here, and if I move this over here, maybe it'll be a little easier to see. I don't know. Oh, apologies. So it's going to error on this line, though. It's going to error here for me on the element because I don't have an element with a new user. You know, it's going to tell me it couldn't find that element. So if I went and took the Phoenix click off of it, it would tell me that it can't find one, you know, that is actually clickable. If I try and submit a form, this is the one that got me. I try and submit a form with data in the form params, and there's no field in the form, there's no input in the form matching this name, it will error. And that one got me. In fact, I had to reach out to Jose directly, and I was like, was this your intention? What's that? I'm sorry.
No problem. That's right. Yes. So if you imagine, if you try to make this with a front end test, with a Chrome-less browser or something like this, to test this from front end side, it's unbelievable, more terrible.
Absolutely, yes, 100%. And it's funny because I think some of this may have actually come out of a conversation around the idea of doing end-to-end testing, right? And needing like another framework or needing to get like full blown, you know, some other, like to spin up, you know, like a headless Chrome or something to be able to do these things. And, you know, it was really more a question like, do we need to, does it make sense to even need to do that? Or do we just need a more expressive way of saying these things? And the one that was probably my favorite within all of this is, well, like I said, the one that if I tried to, so as an example here, all right, I put this test back, and just so you can see that everything went back to normal and all the tests are successful. User, okay, so name and age are things that exist. Let's say I added to my, let's say I added a location to my create attributes, and I just said, well, yeah, location, right? Because we added it to our, yeah, that was the error that got me. So I added, let's say I did all the other work, right? I added location to my change set, I added it to my schema, I put everything in place, right? But if I didn't update the form in my HTML, then LiveView is going to tell me that it could not find a non-disabled input select or text area with the name user location inside that form element. And that totally blew my mind. So yeah, if you're using LiveView and you're not using the new element API, like you're really not doing yourself any favors, because your code's going to get cleaner, clearer, easier to follow. And you can do stuff like say, you know, render me this form, submit the form, follow the redirect to the other page, and then assert that, you know, we got a flash message and that the data was actually created. And being able to do that in like 12 lines of code is just, it's something else. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I had forgot how, like, that's a great thing to point out, and it is super awesome.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, and also I can see looking at your computer that it's lunchtime where you are, and
it is.
Yeah, and it's starting to get late where I am. So I just want to thank you again for the talk. I actually quite liked the way you did it, because it gave me a sense of the developer experience, which I wouldn't have had if you had just shown slides or something. So this is what it's like to work with this code, to work with these tools, put something together. That's kind of the critical thing for me. The next question I would ask myself, because I've most recently spent my life as a React developer. See, functional programming is like my nighttime gig. During the day, for better or worse, JavaScript pays the bills. And it's always interesting to see like what are the alternatives. And it's easy to make a case against JavaScript, but the React ecosystem is so strong and so dominant. I think one has to be wary about jumping too quickly into an alternative that pretends to be better, but you know, in what ways is it better? I think you have to like really make that case. The fact already that you're building something out of like functional programming fundamentals, to me, is a powerful argument in its favor. I'm kind of wondering if there are other arguments that you would advance, whether they're about performance or even more developer experience, like kind of anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, if I was going to point to something directly, I would definitely point to developer experience, but also, I mean, to some extent, the, you know, turnaround too. Like, even what is your, like, not necessarily time to market, right? But how long is it going to take me to ship this feature and or thing that I need to build, and then how much maintenance is going to be required within that feature moving forward. Now, before I have very specific thoughts, and I'm happy to share them. But before I do, I will say that like we're still early. This is still new. We're pre 1.0 on all of the LiveView stuff. That's why it's not just baked directly into, you know, you're not getting it just right out of it. You have to ask for it if you want everything LiveView related when you run the Phoenix installer. So, you know, because we recognize that there's still some work to be done. You know, there's things that we're still trying to flesh out and get in place, and so, you know, to go and build something super, I mean, I've seen it work in a lot of things. I've seen it work a lot, right? But if you need a 1.0 on something before you go put it in production, then, you know, we're too early for you right now. But what I've seen, I mean, the arguments against, to me, look like it's a lot about, is it a good idea to open a WebSocket, you know, on every request? My argument is I think it's fine, because, you know, what's the alternative is you're reloading, you're re-requesting every resource on every request, right? There is some question about, you know, like Frank, like I live very close to most of the large pipes, right? Other people do not. How much performance difference is there for folks in, you know, other places that aren't that close to a backbone or aren't that close to, you know, some of the other things? Like, is it negligible or is it a problem? And that's something we'll need to look into as well. Fortunately, LiveView ships with some like latency simulators and stuff, so you can actually kind of you have the ability to sort of test that for yourself and see what that looks like from the client side. My biggest argument for is that is honestly just like the amount of code. How much code do I need to write to do a thing? For instance, I recently worked on a project where I needed to, I had some hierarchical select boxes for a form, right? So the choice of the first one, you know, dictated what options were available in the second one. Previously, I would need to write full-blown controllers, right? I need an API controller to load that data for me. I would need the form, you know, the handlers on the changes on the form to determine, you know, which AJAX request or call to go make, to then grab that new data and reload that into the page. And I'm maintaining, you know, the state of those things and trying to figure out what's what in the client side. You know, so not only have I've got a bunch of logic now wrapped up in the client side code that I had to write, plus I've got all of this new stuff that I had to expose and secure and, you know, and continue to maintain from the API side just to fill these select boxes. The alternative code in LiveView is about 40 lines, you know, and it's all just right there in Elixir, and it's right next to the, you know, the HTML template, and it's significantly easier to maintain. It's easier to understand, and it flows well with the rest of the system. But, you know, is that enough to say abandon all, you know, all front end work? No, because there's still things that are going to be, you know, necessary there. And I think we continue to see that more as we add, you know, as we've opened up more hooks to client side related things. So one of the latest version of LiveView has a hook for some other client side frameworks. So if you have other things that are manipulating the DOM, there's one that was created for the PHP guys are doing a ton of work in this area too. So dude named Caleb Porzio wrote a library called LiveWire, which is effectively LiveView for Laravel. But he also wrote a thing called Alpine.js to work along with LiveWire. And now, I mean, and it works alongside LiveView as well. So you can do, if you want to keep some certain interactions client side, you can just do them client side, and you don't have to take them to the server. So if you feel like you need, you know, more and more we're finding places to be able to do those sorts of integrations. And so if you need that, you know, it's there for you. But I would personally, if you lean towards like make it work and then make it good and then make it fast, I would write it in Elixir and I would make it work. And then if I needed to improve it, you know, if I needed to get to making it fast, I needed that interaction to the client side, then I have the ability to do that. But I would cross that bridge when I came to it at this point.
Okay, cool. Look, I want to be very clear. I want to be convinced, and even more so, I want to be able to convince others, because it's hard to get people to do things in a different way than what they're accustomed to.
Absolutely,
especially in this ecosystem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. And I mean, the argument, like the latency argument, or the, you know, if I'm like super remote and I have a really garbage connection, is it going to make my experience worse? I think that's a valid question. I think it's something we should explore. But I don't think it means, you know, like, again, abandon all hope, you know, moving down this road, because I haven't seen that. From what I've done so far, I haven't seen that. And the joy of using it and the amount, like, I don't know, it's a lot of fun, and it feels good to write it.
Well,
so,
if Ralph is building apps using Phoenix in Berlin, then it must be possible to do anywhere, because the internet here has got to be among the worst possible in the world.
I've heard from some folks in Australia who have mentioned that, like, they can feel the latency to, say, you know, the EC2 instances in West Virginia or whatever. Now, I don't know. I've never been to Australia, so I don't know. I believe them, right? Like, if they're, you know, I don't deny that that's farther to go than San Francisco, right? So, but yeah, but how you mitigate that, I mean, it sort of depends on your use case, right? If you have something that really needs to be, Well, frankly, I mean, the other argument that I've heard, and one that I'm curious to hear more about, really does come down into accessibility and stuff, right? And if you need to keep certain keystroke things, or there's stuff that you want to do and it needs to stay strictly client side, I think you're going to have to do the more complicated version of some of these things, right? Because if you want to, I shouldn't say it's not more complicated, it's just you have to do it client side. So you're going to need to deal with the fact that you're going to maybe have state in 2 different places. The other side is offline, right? Like it's by nature, it's not, we don't have an offline mode. We are online. So that's, so there's trade-offs, right? There are different things. I think the paradigm is amazing. I love it. It was one of the reasons I wanted to come work at Dockyard. It's one of the reasons I think I probably just gushed enough about these things. And they're like, well, do you want to help us build it? I was like, yeah, sure, fine, let's do that. Because it's just so much fun to work with. And I truly, like, it's just a joy. And I felt that way since I started working with Elixir. I had started getting kind of bummed out, about 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was. So I started kind of looking at stuff, and I was starting to feel a little like, do I want to keep doing this? Would I rather just go teach or something? I don't know. And I started, it was around about that same time that my buddy Vince, told me about Elixir, and I was like, this is awesome. And even though I didn't understand it, because the very first example I saw in it was from the little Elixir and OTP guidebook, which was, here's how you binary pattern match the ID3 tag out of an MP3 file. And I said, what? Like, it was madness to me that was even a possibility, let alone that like that's going to be our hello world today. So from there, like I was sold right from there. And it's just the things you can do are just amazing. Yeah,
as far as Phoenix is concerned, it's possible that you remember how it used to be much simpler to make a website. And I don't know how over the years it's become a virtual impossibility to just get a very basic web application up and running. I don't even want to tell you what I've been having to go through, even at work, just to get to Hello World. I mean, the amount of configuration I need to do. I mean, and DevOps kinds of things. That's a talk for a different time. So possibly Phoenix is helping you recapture some of that lost programmer's whimsy that we all missed. And I think the enthusiasm for this is important. Enthusiasm, to me, is as powerful as, logical reasons why you might choose one tool over another, which we all think that we're reasonable people and everyone has different reasons that they believe in, but enthusiasm, I think, can carry the day here where these are concerned, and developer experience has a lot to do with that. I think being able to deliver things quickly feels good. That has a lot to do with it. So yeah, no, I'm very much intrigued, especially by the way in which you've demonstrated this enthusiasm.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that, for sure. Yeah, and anybody, if there's other questions, or if you're wondering more about Elixir, Phoenix, anything I didn't really get into, feel free to reach out. I'm on the internets, I'm on the Twitters and the what have you. So yeah, love to hear from folks.
Cool. So it's very hard to applaud on Zoom. I think there are like some emojis that people can use, or they can like wave their hands at you. But thank you very much for joining us. So I'm going to end the recording, and then if people want to stick around for a minute to say hello or something, and I actually have one announcement, then they can feel free to do that. Otherwise, we're going to say good night. So thank you again, Michael.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. This was awesome.